rethinking and reinventing journalism in the digital age is something that's very exciting, something that's very challenging too.
Welcome to the very first Facebook Journalism Project Hackathon. One of the key parts of the Facebook Journalism Project is bringing together the news industry with engineers, product developers from Facebook so that they can
Buongiorno a tutti. Grazie Arianne e al Festival per avermi invitato anche quest'anno. Ormai c'è un problema che se non sei invitato ti ammazzi e quindi sono rassicurata. Allora, il mio compito è presentarvi prima Cameron. E se siete d'accordo, abbiamo deciso prima, visto considerato il livello, facciamo un'intervista in inglese, è più facile e più veloce, insomma. E quindi, se mi permettete, passo direttamente alla presentazione di Cameron Barr, who is managing editor of the Washington Post. Managing editor is translatable in Italy with vice direttore esecutivo. Raymond Barr has a long history in journalism. He has been, before being named in 2015 managing editor, but by the then relatively new editor of the Washington Post, Martin Barrow. Before he was in the Middle East for the Christian Science Monitor, and then has had a long career in the Washington Post bureau in Washington, covering all sorts of important issues that have become more and more important on his way up to the rank. Before he was number 2 as a national editor, and then he became a national editor. Let me give you, I have here the speech that Martin Barron, the executive editor, made in 2015 to present him as a new managing editor of the Washington Post. He speaks of him like Cameron as a driven, focused, and super smart journalist. I don't think you need this translation for this. It's used a lot in Italy too. What Martin Barron says about Barr is that Cameron, which I think is important for this meeting, also embraced the post-digital aspiration. He oversaw the launch on Power Post and the Daily 202. Of his career, I think I will say something short, but I think what is important is his achievement also recently first as a deputy national editor and then a national security editor and Middle East editor. He has worked on major issues like NSA revelation, and the issue of Secret Service, and also the shooting at the police, particularly the ear police shooting database. So I simply pass the floor to Cameron Barr, okay, and he will make a speech, and then we will have a Q&A, and then there will be answer from the audience. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucia. I'm going to use this. Lucia, thanks for that overly generous introduction. Of course, it's a privilege to be in this amazing city, in this spectacular room, amid all you interesting people. Chris Potter asked me here to talk about covering the Trump administration. Overnight, we've seen why that is a critical subject. So I'd like to begin with an example of the Post's coverage. One Wednesday in early February, a small team of Post reporters confirmed that Michael Flynn, who was then President Trump's national security advisor, had spoken in late December to Russia's ambassador about sanctions the Obama administration was imposing against Russia. Now, as many of you will recall, Obama was doing this to punish the Russians for their efforts to manipulate the American presidential election. The call between Flynn and Ambassador Sergei Kislyak was news for two reasons. One was that some of our sources had expressed the concern that the conversation was inappropriate, given that it took place when Trump had not yet been sworn in as president, and it might have given Russia reason to believe that the new administration would ratchet back the sanctions once it was in power. The second reason was that the description of the content of the call contradicted statements by Trump White House officials that no such conversation had ever occurred. So on that Wednesday afternoon, one of our reporters, Karen DeYoung, had a previously scheduled interview with General Flynn at his office at the White House. So she asked him whether he and Kislyak had indeed discussed sanctions, and she made clear to him that we had sourcing indicating that that is what they had discussed. And the answer that he gave her was no. He said it twice. So Karen came back to the office and told us what he had said. I have to say, we were a little perplexed. Usually, people will admit the truth when they are presented with evidence by reporters who have pieced something together, even if they don't like it or don't want to admit it. But in this case, that was different. And so we did what people in newsrooms do in situations like this. We stood around, we had meetings, I'm pretty sure I loosened my tie. We sifted through what the sources had told the main reporters, Greg Miller and Adam Entus and Ellen Nakashima. Here we had what we felt was incontrovertible sourcing telling us one thing, and we had a flat denial from the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States. The reporters believed their sources, but the sources were on background. We could describe them as current and former US officials, but we couldn't name them. Flynn was on the record twice. So that was a tough call. My boss, Marty Barron, the executive editor of the Post, decided that evening to hold the story. In the face of Flynn's denial, we couldn't be absolutely sure that what we had was true. And a story that asked people to believe anonymous sources over Flynn would have confused readers. Marty asked us to keep at it. The next day, the reporters got additional sourcing, people who corroborated the earlier accounts. We kept pushing the White House, and Flynn's story shifted. He started to say he could no longer recall what he and Kislyak had discussed. In other words, he dropped his denial, and we published our story. And I recount all of this because it demonstrates something about journalism that is both simple and profound. If something is true, it's true. if you have hold of the facts, even a powerful person or institution can't just make them go away. But the experience also taught me something about the Trump administration's relationship to truth. As we were getting ready to publish on Thursday evening, I took a call from a White House official who asked us not to reveal that Flynn had denied to us a day earlier that he had discussed sanctions with the ambassador. I told the official that I could really see no reason to deprive our readers of that information. I said that at a time when so many people are challenging the veracity of public discourse, it would be wrong to hide the evidence of Flynn's attempt to mislead us. But as I was talking to this official, I thought to myself, they do care. They want to look like truth tellers. They don't want to be exposed as people who would attempt to deny the truth. And there have been several other occasions recently when White House officials have challenged us aggressively to prove that what we were about to publish is factually correct. When we publish something incorrect, which unfortunately we sometimes do, they demand corrections, retractions, apologies. And of course, when we get something wrong, we correct it. The officials of the Trump White House are not the only ones to insist on the truth. Readers are going out of their way to tell us how much they value our work. In recent months, we've been getting emails and letters and postcards from people who are writing in support of independent journalism. Clearly the result of an informal campaign, but we appreciate it nonetheless. One woman sent a postcard saying, "You are so vital to democracy. Keep it up." And another one asked us to set up a donation mechanism on our website because he said that he would enjoy the opportunity to support our mission over and above a subscription. At the Post, we think that journalism is good for democracy. We're proud of having exposed the malfeasance of President Richard Nixon, which led to his resignation. But a lot has changed since the 1970s. The media universe has evolved in amazing and disruptive ways. We are surrounded by conspiracy theories, by instant criticism on social media, by alternative narratives that don't rely on facts. A day is no longer a news cycle. A day is a vessel for multiple news cycles. So is the postcard writer correct? Are we still vital to democracy? And my response is that even in these circumstances, the truth matters, and the answer is yes. Consider, for instance, the impact of the story about Flynn and Kislyak. President Trump fired his national security advisor, who had been in his job just 24 days because we had exposed Flynn's failure to be truthful with the vice president. The White House's attempt to have us cover up his denial is also a demonstration that the truth still matters, even if it's a little backhanded. And the message we are hearing from our readers, that we should do our jobs and do them well, provides still more evidence. So I've been at this work for 30 years, and I can't think of a more invigorating time in American journalism. The presidential campaign has increased public demand for factual information from credible sources. Brand-name legacy organizations like the Washington Post and the New York Times are enjoying a surge of subscriptions as people seek providers of information that they can trust. And the key element in all of this is reporting. For years, used a clumsy but effective definition. Reporting is the revelation of previously undisclosed information that is relevant to the public debate that a powerful person or institution wishes to keep secret. Sometimes that third factor, the secret part, isn't present, and you can still have a terrific story. But if it is present, you can have a game-changing scoop like the piece on Flynn and Kislyak. What we are seeing today is the renewed recognition that revelatory reporting is a key driver of success for news organizations. We have made huge strides in recent years in finding new ways to tell stories. We're more visual, we're more experimental, we're much faster. We've gotten infinitely better at delivering our product to readers in the way that they want it, whether through social media or in a newsletter or as a video. The digital environment has demanded change and creativity, and we've worked hard to keep up. Our tone has changed a lot too. We want things to be interesting, which of course is harder than it sounds. We write narratively more often than we used to. We use the first person more often. We're happy when we can invent a new form, a video-driven presentation that incorporates text and graphics rather than a text-based story that has graphics and video as appendages. We strive to be more transparent in the process of our reporting. Post reporter David Farenthold did terrific work last year exposing Donald Trump's somewhat tortured relationship with charitable giving. David invited readers to be part of his effort, asking for help in tracking down information. At one point, David was searching for a portrait of Trump that the businessman had purchased at a charity auction. Trump had used $10,000 from his foundation to buy the painting. Now, people who maintain charitable foundations aren't supposed to use those resources to buy things for themselves or that might benefit their businesses. It was important to find the portrait, to learn where in the world it was. The Trump campaign and the Trump organization weren't very helpful. So David tweeted a picture of the painting to his followers. Within a day, a reader answered that query. She had identified the painting in photos posted on the web by people who had visited a Trump resort in Miami. Once David learned that, he put that news on Twitter. Enrique Acevedo, an anchor at Univision, saw that tweet. He booked a room at the resort, which is close to Univision's studios in Miami. After he checked in, he started asking the late-night cleaners whether they had seen the portrait. "Oh yeah," one of them told him. "It's downstairs." So as David wrote in a piece for the Post magazine about his quest to understand Trump's philanthropy, bingo. Acevedo found the $10,000 portrait, paid for with charity money, hanging on the wall of the resort's sports bar. In other words, the painting was being used to support a Trump business. So this anecdote is a marvel to me. This is UGC investigative journalism. This is a convergence of technology, reader engagement, and journalistic rigor that could never have happened in an earlier era. David's approach incorporates an openness and a transparency that we need to embrace if we are to win over new readers and convince them that what they are reading on our pages and platforms is verifiable, accurate, that it is true. But the discovery of the portrait also reminds us that our mission, the core of what we offer our audience, is reporting. Previously undisclosed fact, relevant to the public debate, that a powerful person wishes to keep secret. I think you get the idea. Does the Trump presidency change that mission? I really don't think so. It has galvanized readers. It has brought renewed recognition of the value of journalism. It has usefully sharpened the distinction between what is fake and what is fact. But it has not changed our role. Marty Baron likes to say that we are not at war with the Trump administration. We're at work. It's such a good line that some people have put it on t-shirts. It's also very true, and it perfectly captures the zeitgeist these days in the newsroom of the Washington Post. After many years of disruption and uncertainty, as we wondered whether the shifting economics of our business could sustain a newsroom of more than 700 people, we are energized by the opportunity in front of us. We're gratified by the support of our readers, by their increasing inclination to support us through subscriptions, and by their will to join with us in the work of reporting and storytelling. We are respectful of the demands of the people we write about, that we be accurate and fair. And above all, we recognize that the work we do is a necessity in a functioning democracy. It all works together. Readers value our reporting because it is a defense against the abuse of power. And we treasure our readers. We rely on them because they will be our defenders if that power is ever unfairly turned against us. Thank you very much. Now, I think I'll submit to Lucia's interrogation, and then maybe we can have some questions.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your words, very uplifting and reassuring. You may know better than everybody else that the Washington Post has been now for 2 or 3 generations at least, you know, the symbol of capability to reveal with serious stuff what's going on with power. So thank you for this, but I have to ask you a few questions from the other side, from the dark side. You may not be at war with Trump, but Trump is at war with you. So you, meaning you journalists. So I think I'd be interested to explore his side at this point. Before this, I think you all know that last night America bombarded with 59 Tomahawk cruise Syria as some military base. This is a story, I think, that in a way changed a little bit or accelerate the international involvement of America. I just would like to know what you've been thinking about this morning reading the news. So what is your take on the story?
Well, you know, at a basic level, it's why covering the Trump presidency is such a good story, because it's so unpredictable, right? So in one fell swoop, he has deeply antagonized Russia, which put out some very tough statements this morning. And so we're in the midst of a post-election narrative when we're trying to discover what are the relationships between the Trump campaign and Russia. And in a single moment, Donald Trump manages to turn that logic around almost 180 degrees. And it also shows us in a different way how unpredictable he is, right? This is a man who got elected saying that we needed to put America first, that we couldn't involve ourselves in overseas engagements that were not directly in the interest of the United States. And he sort of twists that logic in the stroke of a pen in proving this decision to strike Syria. And finally, I would say that on another level, he's delivering on one of his promises, which is to be different than the Obama administration.
Yes.
And this is where, you know, we had anticipated, I think, that we would see this first in the handling of North Korea, but the devastating use of chemical weapons in Syria has turned that around, and now we're seeing, first in Syria, that Donald Trump is prepared to deliver on his promise to conduct the affairs of the United States radically differently from the previous administration.
Yeah, just one more question about this, is just a detail. I think we're all very impressed, and I use this word that maybe is too light, in Europe, by the amount of generals and military people who populated this new government in. Might this result may be very influential, this presence of high-ranking military people in the government?
Well, you know, always the struggle with a new president is to find out who is close, right? Who has the ear of the president? Who is helping to shape policy from the inside? And I will say that one of the most interesting things that's happened lately is that Trump's advisor, Stephen Bannon, has basically been dropped from the National Security Council. And I think that suggests that the power of H.R. McMaster, the new National Security Advisor, is becoming more felt in the White House. And I think it's a legitimate concern that many people have that there are a lot of generals in the administration, current ones, former ones. And you know, how will that shape policy? Is this really an illustration of that, this strike against Syria? I think it's pretty soon to draw that conclusion. But we do expect, you know, a more militarized approach to the border, the southern border of the United States. It's no accident that there's a general in charge of DHS, the department that handles that. So I think that, you know, that will be an area that we'll continue to investigate.
Thank you. I would like to continue on this, but it's very fascinating. But this is a festival about journalism. So we return to our little big interest. So the point of view of Trump on big journalism, you know. I think this is the first time in my memory that a president of the United States wins the election thanks to the fact that attacks the New York Times and the Washington Post. Yeah. You know, no politician before would have dared to say anything like this. And it was extremely popular, you know. So has this been something significant for you? I mean, like, does it tell you something? And what?
Well, it's a complex question. I mean, on the one hand, yes, he vilified us during the campaign. He referred to the press as the enemy of the people. That, by the way, is on the front of the same T-shirt that has Marty's "We're not at war" quote on the back, but I digress. At the same time, when he wants to get the message out, when he decided that his new healthcare bill could not pass Congress, how did he disseminate that news? He called first a reporter from the Washington Post, who immediately tweeted, "I have Trump on the phone. They're going to pull the healthcare bill." Then he called a second reporter, I think, from the Wall Street Journal. His third call was to a reporter from the New York Times, right? So I think in that you see that he is as reliant on our ability to communicate with voters and with people as any previous president. You know, as to the vilification of the press, you know, I sort of see that in two ways. Yes, the press is always subject to public criticism, the criticism from politicians who don't like the work that we do. That's fine. That's part of the territory. But I would point you back to what I talked about in my remarks, which is that we're seeing in this day and age an outpouring of support for independent journalism, for the kind of fact-finding and reporting that we can do. So from where I sit, it kind of balances out, and I really appreciate the support that we get from readers.
I would like to stay on these issues because I think in part we share in Europe the same experience, at least on this. You know, I think politician is true. They always want to dominate the press. In Italy, we have a long experience from the right to the center right, the center left. Any new guy come in and attacks you, you know. And as you rightly say, if we write something wrong, they immediately put out a story that denies it. If they don't do the denial, then it's true. You know, this is so it's pretty easy, the dynamic between a journalist and politician. But in this case, in America, seems that there is the same phenomenon that in Europe. The journalist is seen as a part of the elite, as a part of a class completely detached from the real people, the real feeling. And in fact, if I may say, I think people who feel this way in Italy may not be wrong, you know. I respect people that says that we are more and more detached from reality. And you can see this from the fact that even legacy newspapers are falling in their circulation. So is there something true there?
Well, I'll just tell you one brief story. So right after Trump referred to the press as the enemy of the people, one of my colleagues who was on the editorial page wrote a column about some of the people on the staff of the Post. And he wrote about, first of all, one of our Pentagon reporters who is a combat veteran whose best friend was killed in Afghanistan. And then the columnist went through several people on the Post staff, right? There was the son of a Lutheran minister. There was the son of, or the daughter of a farmer. There was the son of a policeman. Then people started to tweet in response to that. I wrote that I was the son of a World War II veteran and a Foreign Service officer. And you started to see, and I think the columnist's name is Dana Milbank, you started to see from this column that, in fact, journalists are just as much the people, right? They come from a variety of strata of society, that we are not quite so elite and quite so removed from in the way that politicians would like to portray us.
And yet, and this is the last question, but I have to have one more question on this. If you see Brexit, you know, mainly the big newspaper like Financial Times, above all, and the Wall Street Journal, you know, the most two influential newspaper in Europe on the market, they were completely unaware that Brexit could win. And I think the same goes for Trump. You know, well, I belong to the Huffington Post that really took the wrong line, and I said this a long time ago, I said this to Arianna, I said, we cannot play Trump in the third column, you know, the fun column. And when I said he may win, Arianna went like, oh, but of course, you know, I think we were just a bit more aware because we are European. So it is true, one thing, that the major newspaper and the major news organization have not been aware of what was going on in their countries.
You know, I would say, in part, fair point. I would say a couple of other things as well. So, yeah, in contrast to HuffPo, I think we at the Post took Donald Trump more seriously from the very beginning. I could point you to a New York Times story right after HuffPo had put him in the entertainment column, and I was interviewed for that, and I said, anyone who polls as high among Republican voters as Donald Trump is going to be taken seriously in the Washington Post. You know, one other aspect of the story, I think the aspect of the story where we were weak is in covering what I think of as sort of the lower middle, the economic lower middle of American society, right? So journalists are drawn to extremes, right? Drawn to violence, drawn to stories of poverty, stories of suffering and struggle, right? But there is, especially in American society, the sort of lower middle class, lower working class strata whose concerns and whose frustration with the economy and with how society was evolving, those concerns were not as fully covered as they should have been. You know, when Trump started to gather steam, we started to pay more attention. And we wrote some very good pieces about the kind of support that he was getting, very good profiles of people who felt that frustration. But in the years leading up to the campaign year, I think you're right. I think we failed to understand sort of the working class disappointment with how the globalized economy was treating them. You can look at the numbers to understand why this is so, right? Wage growth has been very stagnant, even though overall economic growth has been acceptable. So is that a fault of journalists that we missed that story, that we failed to capture that disaffection? I think that's a fair criticism.
Now, Martin Barron is famous for the famous spotlight story, you know. Sure. He's a master of big journalism, very close to people. And you yourself have, you know, we told you your bio before. Have you ever sat down, the two of you, to discuss exactly what beyond the saying now? Hey, how are we going to be closer to people? Have you been discussing between the two of you this?
We have talked about that. I mean, the two of us, but also larger groups in the
you
Post.
You are the top
but,
of the...
you know, I think that one of the mistakes of journalism sometimes is to, you know, always be covering the story that you just missed. Right? So, you know, in our newsroom, there are lots of departments now that are very focused on Trump's America and trying to sort of capture something that we may not have been really great at covering in the run-up to the election, which is great. We want to pay attention in ways that we didn't before. We want to see things more clearly than we did before. But at the same time, we don't all want to rush towards that objective and then miss the next thing.
The next story,
right?
yes.
Because that's also part of our job, is to catch that.
You were mentioning before how the journalism has changed since the 70s, focusing particularly, seems to me, to the interaction at this point, which is endless in terms of result, of different narrative, different media, different point of view, echo chambers moving against each other, etc. Now, the Washington Post has, in a way, has taken the first place in the row as a newspaper that is experimenting between new media and old media. Jeff Bezos per se is the symbol of this. So tell us something, how this legacy media is working together with the new media.
Well, you know, I think Jeff Bezos deserves some credit for this, so does Marty Baron, so do some other people at the Post, right? Obviously the media universe has changed. You know, when I talk to colleagues about this, I try to kind of engender an atmosphere of enthusiasm, right? I mean, as I said with telling that story about David Farenthold, we can do things today we could never have imagined before, right? It's a tremendous opportunity to both connect with readers, how we bring them into the work that we do, how we reach them with the story. You know, even though we've been through so much disruption in more established media companies, there's tremendous opportunity to take our business in new directions, to even achieve profitability, which the Post managed to do last year, and which we think we'll be able to do again this year. It's a very exciting time, and I think it's also time for us to kind of move past the despair and frustration that we felt, and to embrace what it is that we can do with the technology that we have available.
You see, the most interesting thing about the Washington Post for me is that the change has now come as a disruption also of the old establishment within the newspaper. You were mentioning before about Flynn, Karen DeYoung. Now, Karen DeYoung, you don't know who she is, but she's a very formidable person in Washington, formidable in both sense. She's also huge, large, you know, an important journalist. Yeah. So fundamentally, in this change, you haven't lost your old name, your old job, and yet you're doing something new. I think this is really unique, no? Because the change is most disruptive in other places.
You know, Lucia, I would say that Donald Trump deserves some of the credit for that, right? Because I think the Trump candidacy and all of that we experienced last year validated the act of reporting in surprising ways. And so when we were making decisions about how to grow our staff this year, we put more money into investigative reporting because readers responded to that so enthusiastically and so gratefully last year in reporting that we did on candidates, not just Trump, but across the board. And so we heard that message, right? We heard the message that one of the drivers of our success is, you know, what we think of as old school, but it's not old school, right? Revelatory reporting is still what people turn to journalists for.
Good. I think that we should underline the fact that your experience and your word right now prove that new journalism doesn't mean shallower journalism. No. Does not mean less money, less investment. It does not mean stupidity in general, you know, like you fly through the story instead to go deep. Well, I will leave the experience here, and we have 20 minutes for questions from this room. How are we going to manage this? People are going to raise their hand? The first one. Yeah. I would We don't hear. Raffaele. Now, let me tell you who this guy is. This guy is the guy who was the head of the union inside Corriere della Sera, which could be described as our New York Times, put the management on his knees for many years. There was nothing going on at Corriere della Sera that Raffaele Fiengo could not put his words on.
I want just to know how many journalists are working on today's worldview, because it's an interesting way of comparing with the paywall, I think. No, everybody can ask for this and receive it. It's very well done.
Great.
And I would like to know how many people are working on it and how many journalists, because this is the way to have quality journalism and paywall together.
Yeah. So today's Worldview is a newsletter that we started, I don't know, 2 months ago or something like that, that is aimed at an international audience. It reaches Europe at 7 a.m. It's a morning newsletter. The answer to your question is that there is one principal writer, Ishan Tharoor, and there is one principal editor. But their job is really to leverage the work of foreign staff overall. And the foreign staff at the Post is about 18 correspondents overseas, and another dozen or so people in the newsroom. And some of those people, 3 or 4 of them, are focused on a blog called Worldviews, which is the sort of the parent of the newsletter. And that is, we put that together so that we could do more explanatory work about foreign affairs, because a lot of times stories come out of nowhere, and journalists are very, have the background, but readers don't. So we wanted to find ways to write explainers and Q&As and other things quickly that would help bring readers up to speed. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I'm sure by now this is still a new effort, but I'm sure it's in the hundreds of thousands. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question? There.
Thank you. My name is John Murphy. I'm an academic from the UK. You've told us some stories that you've written about Trump and the administration. And last night, the President of the United States admitted that he'd watched something on television and launched an airstrike on the basis of what he'd seen on television. And his esteem to the public will go up as a result. Could you please tell me what sort of story would actually make a dent in Trump's popularity? Because any of these things would have brought down a previous president, for example, President Kennedy.
Donald Trump has the lowest popularity, the lowest approval ratings of any American president since public opinion surveying has been established. I mean, I think his early track record has been a very challenging one, right? He's had to fire his national security advisor as a result of good journalism, I would argue. He failed to pass, one of the things that he promised voters time and time again was that he would pass a new system of healthcare in the United States that was cheaper and better. The plan that he put forward would have sharply limited the number of people who receive health insurance in the United States. It failed to pass Congress. A devastating defeat for a president in the very early days of office. So I guess I'm challenging the premise of your question a little bit. I think that his approval ratings are really lousy compared with other presidents, and I think that's a function of some of the aggressive reporting, both on television and in other forms of media, that he's experienced in his early days in office.
I have a first there, and then I'll come to you. Okay, we can do the reverse.
Diana Henrique is a contributing writer with the New York Times.
Sure.
Hi, Cameron.
Hi.
Trump incorporated this unprecedented situation where the President of the United States remains the the beneficiary of an extraordinary set of conflicts of interest that, that we've never really dealt with before. The US isn't really as attuned to stories about crony capitalism as we have seen developed in other nations around the world. What particular challenges does this pose for you as the Post, this blend of a need for financial literacy and political savvy, and how are you trying to adapt to the Trump Incorporated world?
A really good question. I think the answer is it's a little bit of a slow start. I wish we were doing better at that. It is complex. I think we've done some good work in how much taxpayers are being asked to pay to protect members of the Trump family, particularly his sons who are running the business, as they go overseas to promote their work. There's been some great reporting in the New York Times about how these conflicts are overlapping with the interests of the administration. There's been some really great, slightly whimsical reporting, but important nonetheless, about how often Trump makes use of his own properties in the conduct of his presidency. So he vacations or he takes weekends at Mar-a-Lago, this and he is often at a Trump golf course or some kind of Trump business enterprise, which of course creates benefits for him as a businessman. So, I think the short answer to your question is we just have to keep at it. And we have to keep prying loose the documentation and the business results from those companies so that we can see how they're benefiting from the presidency. Sorry, in many ways it is, yes, because there are so many business figures along with generals, to echo back to Lucia's point, in the Trump cabinet. And so many amateurs, right? People who've never held public office before.
Before the next question, I just want to put myself also in this discussion. I'm very surprised that a country like America is so oblivious to conflict of interest. We made a big point in Italy with Berlusconi, of course, and for us it was like, well, in America it would have never happened like this, right? Then, you go there and everybody, I can't believe it. The people allow, so many family interests to be intercepted inside the White House. I can't believe how oblivious people seem, even Democrats. I thought that it was more, more of a skin there, why is this?
I was not so oblivious any longer.
No, but no.
We're working on that.
No, I know, but you're the press.
Yeah.
But New York seems completely New York, just to say something. Besides, I think this is so New Yorkish, this story, it's so New Jersey, New York, all this area around here. I'm surprised that in New York there isn't a group of people just from the business that say, hey, you're taking so much advantage of this. This is not right. You don't need to be a Democrat to fight conflict of interest. You just need to be a wise businessman. So why is it the businessmen don't say anything?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that, and down to point two, there have been some very loud voices from ethics advisors to governments of both parties, Republican and Democrat, who are filing lawsuits to try to expose these conflicts of interest and to make clear to Congress that it too has to step up to ensure that these things are policed effectively. I think that America's catching up to Europe a little bit in the awareness.
It's catching up to Europe. This is a good... Next questions. Yes,
yeah,
this lady here and then the next.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Alexandra Pascalidou and I'm a freelance journalist, and I'm happy to hear that you mentioned Berlusconi, because I'm surprised we are being so surprised about Trump. So what I'm wondering is, do you see similarities between Berlusconi and Trump, and what did you in Italy learn on how to treat personalities or presidents like that?
Is this a question
You should
to
take
me
that.
or to...
Yeah, to both of you.
No, but definitely you should take that.
I'll say this very shortly. Of course, since Trump started to be on a winning strike, my house, I'm married to an American reporter, you know, a former reporter, is writing books now, who of course, asks us exactly the same question. I mean, is he the same Berlusconi? Is the same thing like Berlusconi? And I always say no, on one base. Definitely one base. Trump is a person, as a populist who does not like the party system, and in fact was born out of bombarding the party system and everything that goes with the party system, including media, power, including the judicial, etc. Berlusconi, despite his good reputation, was a guy who came in with the same intention, but in fact built a party and tried to put himself within the institutional framework, which was his death at the end. You know, he tried so much to be part of the institution that find a big wall, institution big wall, because if you want to be part of the institution, then you have to pay for conflict of interest and all other things that you don't do politically right. I think Trump is out of this thing. Trump is Trump represents a new game, you know?
And the question becomes to what extent he can win over enough of the Republican Party to actually be effective in creating legislation, right? I mean, one of the things that we've seen in the early days of the Trump administration is how strong our society is, both in the media, in people's inclination to organize, on the Hill, in Congress. You know, I think it's been a sort of an enlivening.
Okay, I have there, and another one, and I think that will be it, because we have 5 more minutes, and I know that rooms have to be evacuated very fast, usually.
Yes, thank you. I'm John Neri from the Philippine Daily Inquirer. The idea that we're not at war with the Trump administration, we're at work, is a great rallying cry, a paean to professionalism. 2 quick questions. One, does this mean you will never hire or run the work of good journalists who are avowedly against Trump? And number 2, how do you manage reporters and editors of the Washington Post who have very strong opinions against Trump?
Sorry, would you give me the first question
The
again?
first is, does this mean that you will never hire or run the work of very good journalists who are avowedly at war against Trump?
Hold on a second, we don't hear anything. C'è qualcosa con il microfono perché non sentiamo.
Is that working? 1, 2, 3. We're good? Okay. So just to repeat the question, would we hire journalists who are at war with the Trump administration? Yeah, I think the short answer to that is no. I mean, there's a place for very opinionated journalists who have a very clear point of view, and that's the editorial page, right? And so I speak for the news side of the Washington Post, and where we want to be as dispassionate as possible about who's in power, right? We want to do our work aggressively, but we don't want to promote one political agenda over the other in our news columns. And I know that that's sometimes seen as a quaint way of operating a journalistic institution, but nonetheless, we still do it. And tell me again your second question.
How do you manage your own people already working for you who have very strong opinions about Trump? For instance, on Twitter, they rant against him and so on.
Well, I mean, it's a related point, right? I think if people have such strong opinions about the president in power, then they shouldn't be a news reporter.
Final question. I think.
Thank you very much. It's a really interesting issue for me as a Turkish journalist, and this is about the usage of language.
Wait, aspetta, non sento niente. Am I the only one who doesn't hear anything?
The use of language by mainstream media. In the past few months, for instance, in the New York Times, we see the usage of words like Trump lies, the word lie. With the Washington Post, it was more like a more politically correct language, we can say, I think. Do you think that such language, for instance, calling a lie, is okay in the mainstream media when it is really a lie, or does it serve to more polarization, more divisions among the public? Instead of persuading other people, it will alienate them. What do you think?
Yeah, I go with plan B there. I think lie is a really strong and very heated and very emotional word. And so I think it doesn't really have a place in news reporting about the accuracy or the validity of something a politician says. You know, I won't rule it out ever. I think to me it demands a certain kind of understanding of someone's intention in saying something false, right? So if we can show through reporting that, you know, the person had a report that said one thing, and we know that that person read the report, you know, a few minutes before he or she went on TV or went in front of an audience and said the opposite, then I think we would use the word lie to describe that. But it's exceedingly rare for us to have that kind of interior understanding or knowledge of what someone knew at a certain time and why they said something false. As a general proposition in our news reporting, you know, I want the emotional level to be turned down so that people can read what we write and draw their own conclusions, have their own emotional response. I don't want to feel for readers. I don't want to think for readers. I want to give the readers the information. There's plenty of places, if people want to read emotional, passionate, opinionated writing about public affairs, there are plenty of places, including the last 2 pages of the Washington Post, right? Or the opinion section on our homepage, where they can find that kind of writing. In our reporting, I'm trying to keep the emotional temperature down, because one thing I want more than anything else is to reach the widest possible audience, the people who may be supporters of President Trump and who may be opponents of President Trump, because I'm interested in providing the broad spectrum of American voters with the information they need to function in our democracy. I'm not interested in pandering or speaking directly to people who've already made up their minds.
Very well. I think this is the perfect conclusion. I thank you, Cameron Barr, and thank you all of you. Grazie moltissime, ci rivediamo l'anno prossimo.
You're the last person the world wants to upset. I'd like to line about the fact that you've damaged the Trump administration. So the quote I've got is, among other things, is not social security advisor. Approval rate is extremely low for any
For those who wish to leave the room, please leave by the front entrance to my left. For those wishing to leave the room now, before the next event, please use the door to my left at the front of the stage. Thank you. The exit is at the front of the room.
Si prega il gentile pubblico di lasciare la sala utilizzando l'uscita dietro il grande schermo. Grazie.
Passo direttamente alla presentazione di Cameron Barr, who is managing editor of the Washington Post. Managing editor is translatable in Italy with vice direttore esecutivo. Raymond Barr has a long history in journalism. He has been, before being named in 2015 managing editor, but by the then relatively new editor of the Washington Post, Martin Barrow. Before he was in the Middle East for the Christian Science Monitor, and then has had a long career in the Washington Post bureau in Washington, covering all sorts of important issues that have become more and more important on his way up to the rank. Before he was number 2 as a national editor, and then he became a national editor. Let me give you, I have here the speech that Martin Barron, the executive editor, made in 2015 to present him as a new managing editor of the Washington Post. He speaks of him like Cameron as a driven, focused, and super smart journalist. I don't think you need this translation for this. It's used a lot in Italy too. What Martin Barron, says about Barr is that Cameron, which I think is important for this meeting, also embraced the post-digital aspiration. He oversaw the launch on PowerPost and the Daily 202. Of his career, I think I will say something short, but I think what is important is his achievement also recently first as a deputy national editor and then a national security editor and Middle East editor. He has worked on major issues like NSA revelation, and the issue of Secret Service, and also the shooting at the police, particularly the ear police shooting database. So I simply pass the floor to Cameron Barr.
That is what they had discussed. And the answer that he gave her was no. He said it twice. So Karen came back to the office and told us what he had said. I have to say, we were a little perplexed. Usually, people will admit the truth when they are presented with evidence by reporters who have pieced something together, even if they don't like it or don't want to admit it. But in this case, that was different. And so we did what people in newsrooms do in situations like this. We stood around, we had meetings. I'm pretty sure I loosened my tie. We sifted through what the sources had told the main reporters, Greg Miller and Adam Entus and Ellen Nakashima. Here we had what we felt was incontrovertible sourcing telling us one thing, and we had a flat denial from the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States. The reporters believed their sources, but the sources were on background. We could describe them as current and former US officials, but we couldn't name them. Flynn was on the record twice. So that was a tough call. My boss, Marty Barron, the executive editor of the Post, decided that evening to hold the story. In the face of Flynn's denial, we couldn't be absolutely sure that what we had was true. And a story that asked people to believe anonymous sources over Flynn would have confused readers. Marty asked us to keep at it. The next day, the reporters got additional sourcing, people who corroborated the earlier accounts. We kept pushing the White House, and Flynn's story shifted. He started to say he could no longer recall what he and Kislyak had discussed. In other words, he dropped his denial, and we published our story. And I recount all of this because it demonstrates something about journalism that is both simple and profound. If something is true, it's true. If you have hold of the facts, even a powerful person or institution can't just make them go away. But the experience also taught me something about the Trump administration's relationship to truth. As we were getting ready to publish on Thursday evening, I took a call from a White House official who asked us not to reveal that Flynn had denied to us a day earlier that he had discussed sanctions with the ambassador. I told the official that I could really see no reason to deprive our readers of that information. I said that at a time when so many people are challenging the veracity of public discourse, it would be wrong to hide the evidence of Flynn's attempt to mislead us. But as I was talking to this official, I thought to myself, they do care. They want to look like truth tellers. They don't want to be exposed as people who would attempt to deny the truth. And there have been several other occasions recently when White House officials have challenged us aggressively to prove that what we were about to publish is factually correct. When we publish something incorrect, which unfortunately we sometimes do, they demand corrections, retractions, apologies. And of course, when we get something wrong, we correct it. The officials of the Trump White House are not the only ones to insist on the truth. Readers are going out of their way to tell us how much they value our work. In recent months, we've been getting emails and letters and postcards from people who are writing in support of independent journalism. Clearly the result of an informal campaign, but we appreciate it nonetheless. One woman sent a postcard saying, "You are so vital to democracy. Keep it up." And another one asked us,
and he will make a speech, and then we will have a Q&A, and then there will be answer from the audience. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucia. I'm going to use this. Lucia, thanks for that overly generous introduction. Of course, it's a privilege to be in this amazing city, in this spectacular room, amid all you interesting people. Chris Potter asked me here to talk about covering the Trump administration. Overnight, we've seen why that is a critical subject. So I'd like to begin with an example of the Post's coverage. One Wednesday in early February, a small team of Post reporters confirmed that Michael Flynn, who was then President Trump's national security advisor, had spoken in late December with Russia's ambassador about sanctions the Obama administration was imposing against Russia. Now, as many of you will recall, Obama was doing this to punish the Russians for their efforts to manipulate the American presidential election. The call between Flynn and Ambassador Sergei Kislyak was news for two reasons. One was that some of our sources had expressed the concern that the conversation was inappropriate, given that it took place when Trump had not yet been sworn in as president, and it might have given Russia reason to believe that the new administration would ratchet back the sanctions once it was in power. The second reason was that the description of the content of the call contradicted statements by Trump White House officials that no such conversation had ever occurred. So on that Wednesday afternoon, one of our reporters, Karen DeYoung, had a previously scheduled interview with General Flynn at his office at the White House. So she asked him whether he and Kislyak had indeed discussed sanctions, and she made clear to him that we had sourcing indicating
rethinking and reinventing journalism in the digital age is something that's very exciting, something that's very challenging too.
Welcome to the very first Facebook Journalism Project Hackathon. One of the key parts of the Facebook Journalism Project is bringing together the news industry with engineers, product developers from Facebook so that they can
Buongiorno a tutti. Grazie Arianne al Festival per avermi invitato anche quest'anno. Ormai c'è un problema che se non sei invitato ti ammazzi e quindi sono rassicurata. Allora, il mio compito è presentarvi prima Cameron. E se siete d'accordo, abbiamo deciso prima, considerato il livello, facciamo un'intervista in inglese, è più facile e più veloce, insomma. E quindi, se mi permettete,